My son-in-law tripped me right in front of the courtroom laughing. "You old loser, you're a disgrace to the family." My daughter stood next to him and said nothing. 5 minutes later, I sat down in the judge's chair, and they turned pale, realizing that. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you were listening in the comments. The documents appeared in the printer tray like evidence left at a crime scene. I'd gone to print retirement paperwork, something mundane about pension distribution, and found them waiting. Bank statements, corporate agreements. Stewart's name scattered across pages like fingerprints. I lifted the first sheet. Delaware Consulting Group, LLC. Account summary showing deposits of $340,000, then immediate transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. The second page listed another entity. Precision Capital Management. Same pattern. My hands steadied as 30 years of appellate experience kicked in. I knew money laundering when I saw it. 7 more pages, different LLCs, identical structures. I folded them carefully and walked to my study, closing the door before switching on the desk lamp. The mahogany surface gleamed as I spread everything out, reading each line twice. Stewart had printed these today, probably this afternoon, then forgotten them. Careless. Criminals always made one stupid mistake. Upstairs, I heard voices. Stewart's laugh, sharp and confident. Edith responding with something soft I couldn't make out. My daughter and her husband, living in my house rent-free for 2 months now. Since I retired from the bench in December, they'd moved in with talk of helping during the transition and spending time together. I'd believe them. I locked the documents in my desk drawer and checked my watch. 7:45, dinner in 15 minutes. The dining room table seated 8, but only 3 chairs held bodies tonight. Stewart sat at the head, my usual spot, while Edith arranged serving dishes. I took my father's old chair, the one with the loose back leg I'd never fixed. Sylvester. Stewart never called me Dad anymore. Edith and I were discussing opportunities, investment strategies for the future. What kind of strategies? I kept my voice neutral, the tone I'd used when questioning attorneys about dubious precedents. Real estate primarily, leveraging assets. He cut into his steak with surgical precision. You're sitting on significant equity here. 800,000, maybe more in this market, just for one person. Edith touched his arm. Stewart means we should think about smart planning. Planning for what? Stewart leaned back, wine glass balanced in his fingers. Estate planning, tax optimization. You should transfer the house deed to us now. Saves complications later, keeps everything in the family. The words landed carefully, like he'd rehearsed them. I watched my daughter nod in agreement, her eyes on her plate. "I'll consider it," I said. "Don't overthink it." Stewart's smile showed teeth. "You're a retired judge, not a financial planner. This is what I do: structure wealth, minimize tax burden, trust the expert. I handle corporate cases, financial fraud, money laundering. You handle cases someone else investigated," he interrupted without apology. "You made decisions based on briefs and arguments. That's not the same as building wealth in real markets." Edith said nothing. Her silence felt heavier than Stewart's condescension. I asked about his consulting business. He waved the question away like smoke. Modern finance moves fast. Digital transactions, international markets. Your world was courtrooms and precedent. Mine is innovation. What do you innovate? Capital structures? Corporate optimization? Nothing you'd find interesting. His tone suggested the conversation bored him. The point is, you don't need this much space. 4 bedrooms for one person? It's inefficient. I raised Edith here. Past tense, Stewart said. Raised. She's 35 now. Time for practical thinking. My daughter finally spoke. We're family, Father. We should approach these things together. I excused myself after the meal, carrying my plate to the kitchen before returning to my study. The drawer unlocked with a familiar click. I spread the documents again under lamplight, seeing them differently now. 7 LLCs. Transaction patterns showing classic layering, money moving through multiple accounts to obscure origin. Each company formed in Delaware within months of each other. Total funds processed, over $3 million in 2 years. Stewart wasn't just disrespectful. He was a criminal, living in my house, eating my food, trying to take my property. And Edith either knew or chose blindness. Upstairs, I heard them laughing about something. The sound drifted down through old floors, mocking my isolation. I placed the documents in my personal safe, the one installed when I made appellate court. The door closed with a heavy thunk, locking away evidence. My hands moved automatically, muscle memory from years of handling sensitive materials. The leather chair creaked as I sat back. This was the same seat where I'd written hundreds of opinions, crafted legal reasoning that sent criminals to prison. Stewart thought I was finished. An old man to manipulate, a relic whose opinion didn't matter. He'd miscalculated badly. I wasn't retired from thinking. My mind still worked with the precision that built a 30-year career on evidence and procedure. They wanted my house. They'd have to explain their finances first, to federal prosecutors, to juries, to judges who'd learned from my rulings. The lamp cast shadows across my desk. I sat in the darkness beyond its glow, planning, not rushing. Justice required patience, documentation, perfect timing. They thought they knew me. They didn't. The next week moved slowly. I waited, watched, and planned. Stewart went to his office, the converted guest room on the second floor, every morning at 8. Edith left for yoga 3 times weekly at 9:30. I learned their patterns the way I'd once learned case law, through systematic observation. Thursday arrived with rain. They left together for lunch with Edith's friends, mentioning they'd be gone until 3. I waited 30 minutes after their car disappeared down the street. Stewart's office smelled of expensive cologne and printer ink. 3 monitors glowed on his desk, screensavers cycling through abstract patterns. I opened the first filing cabinet with steady hands. No lock. He felt that secure. The documents organized themselves by company name: Delaware Consulting Group, Precision Capital Management. 5 more I hadn't seen yet. I photographed every page with my phone, careful to maintain exact positioning. LLC formation papers, bank routing numbers, client lists with corporate names. I recognized from news reports about securities fraud. One document stopped my methodical work: a lease agreement showing Stewart paying me $2,400 monthly for office space. My signature, forged, next to his real one. A notary stamp from Patricia Chen, dated 6 months back. He wasn't just living free. He was creating false records claiming rental expenses. Tax deduction fraud layered on top of money laundering. The criminality expanded with each photograph. 40 minutes. 68 photos. I repositioned everything precisely and locked the cabinet. Downstairs, I transferred images to my laptop and backed them up on an external drive hidden in my safe. Stewart and Edith returned at 3:15, laughing about something. Neither noticed anything amiss. 3 days later, I drove to Newcastle. The coffee shop sat 20 minutes from my neighborhood, far enough to avoid accidental encounters. Gordon Rice arrived exactly on time, still moving with the prosecutor's punctuality we'd both learned decades ago. "Sylvester." He shook my hand firmly. "You said urgent." I showed him the photographs on my phone. Gordon's expression hardened as he scrolled through images. "This is federal jurisdiction," he said quietly. "Multiple states, interstate wire transfers. We're looking at serious charges." "How long to build the case?" 6 to 8 weeks if these documents verify. We'll need forensic accounting, warrant for bank records." He looked up from the phone. "Who's the target?" I hesitated, then spoke. "My son-in-law." Gordon's eyes widened slightly. "Sylvester, can you do it?" "Yes, but you'll be a witness. This gets complicated for you." "I know." We discussed procedure over coffee that went cold in our cups. Gordon would open an investigation quietly, build the case without alerting Stewart, then move fast when ready. I'd provide formal testimony when needed. "You're certain about this?" Gordon asked as we stood to leave. "Completely." Back home, I parked and entered through the garage. Stewart's car sat in the driveway. I'd been gone 90 minutes. No one asked where I'd been. The next 2 weeks brought escalating pressure. Stewart's casual suggestions about the house became direct demands. During dinner one evening, he dropped all pretense. "Let's stop dancing around this, Sylvester. You're 64, retired, alone in a house built for a family. Transfer the deed now. You can live here comfortably. We'll handle everything." I looked at Edith. She met my eyes briefly, then studied her wine glass. "What if I refuse?" I asked. Stewart leaned forward. "You won't. You're reasonable, and honestly, you don't have many options. Who else cares whether you're here or in some retirement community? The words hit like fists. I kept my expression neutral. I need time to think. About what? Stewart's frustration showed now. You're in your final chapter. Let us write ours. That evening, I activated the digital recorder I'd purchased 3 days earlier. Small enough to hide in my shirt pocket, sensitive enough to capture clear audio. I'd tested it twice in my study. The next dinner conversation went further. Stewart had 2 glasses of wine before speaking. The house should be ours anyway. You're just occupying it until the inevitable. The inevitable, I asked mildly. Don't be obtuse. You've got what, 15 years? 20 if you're lucky. Why wait to transfer when we can maximize the asset now? Edith's voice came softly. We're thinking of your welfare, Father. My welfare. I let the words hang. Stewart pushed his plate aside. Your problem is you think being a judge made you special. It didn't. You were a bureaucrat in a robe, interpreting laws other people wrote. I create value. I understand systems, money systems, people systems. You understood precedent. I make my own rules. The recorder caught every word. I noticed, I said quietly. Stewart paused, perhaps hearing something in my tone, but the wine had made him comfortable. You've had your turn, built your career, lived your life. This house, this equity, it's wasted on one old man. Edith touched his arm. Stewart, I'm being honest. He looked at me directly. You're in decline, slow decline, but decline nonetheless. Be reasonable about reality. I nodded slowly. I understand reality better than you think. That night, after they'd gone upstairs, I sat in my study reviewing the recording, crystal clear audio, Stewart's voice unmistakable, his words damning. Combined with the financial documents now in Gordon's hands, the case built itself. Federal investigation opened, evidence documented, recordings secured. I organized everything in my safe with the same precision I'd once used for court opinions. They thought I was defeated, a lonely old man to manipulate and discard. They saw retirement as weakness, age as vulnerability. They'd learn differently soon enough. I'd spent 3 decades in the system that would destroy Stewart. I knew its mechanisms, its procedures, its inexorable justice. The wheels were turning now, grinding slowly toward his reckoning. I was no longer the victim. I was the prosecutor, and I held all the cards. 2 weeks passed. Gordon worked fast. The federal machinery, once set in motion, moved with quiet efficiency. I went about my routine, morning coffee, afternoon reading, evening meals with Stewart and Edith. They noticed nothing. Then, on a Tuesday morning, everything changed. The doorbell rang at 7:15. I was in my study, already dressed. Through the window, 3 dark SUVs filled my driveway. 6 agents and FBI windbreakers stood on the porch. I opened the door before they knocked twice. The lead agent showed his badge. Federal warrant to search these premises, specifically the office of Stewart Holmes. I stepped aside. Guest room upstairs, first door on the right. Stewart appeared at the top of the stairs in pajamas, face drained of color. What is this? Sylvester, what's happening? I didn't answer. Gordon Rice entered last, nodded briefly in my direction. Stewart's voice cracked as he descended. You're behind this. Gordon's tone stayed flat. Mr. Holmes, we're executing a search warrant. I suggest you get dressed and contact an attorney. The agents moved with practiced efficiency. I watched from the hallway as they photographed Stewart's office, tagged items, filled evidence boxes, 3 desktop computers, 2 laptops, filing cabinets emptied systematically. Edith appeared, wrapping a robe around herself, and positioned herself beside Stewart. Her arm circled his waist protectively. She looked at me once, eyes full of accusation. Father, how could you let them do this? I met her gaze without flinching. They have a warrant, federal jurisdiction. I have no authority to stop them. Stewart's lawyer arrived 90 minutes into the search. Marcus Webb, expensive suit perfectly pressed despite the early hour, confident demeanor that radiated competence. He conferred with Gordon, reviewed the warrant with sharp eyes, then pulled Stewart aside for a whispered conversation. Don't speak to anyone, Webb said loud enough for me to hear, especially not your father-in-law. 3 hours later, the FBI loaded the last box into their vehicles. Gordon paused at my door. Thank you for your cooperation, Judge Robertson. The formal title hung in the air. Stewart heard it. His jaw tightened. After they left, Stuart cornered me in the kitchen. I was pouring coffee, movements deliberately calm. "You did this." His voice shook with barely controlled rage. "I don't know how, but you did this." I added cream to my cup. "They're investigating financial crimes. If you've done nothing wrong, you have nothing to worry about." His face reddened. "Nothing wrong? I'm a legitimate consultant." Edith joined him, hand on his shoulder. "Father, you've never liked Stuart. You've never accepted him." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. "I've accepted him into my home, for months, rent-free." Stuart stepped closer. "This is our home too." I set down my cup. The ceramic clicked against granite. "No, it's my home. You're guests." Edith's voice cracked. "We're family." I said nothing. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Stuart grabbed Edith's hand. "Come on, we're going out. I can't be in the same room as him right now." I waited until their car left, before driving to Mildred's office. My sister looked up from her desk as I entered, concern etched in the lines around her eyes. "I saw the news. FBI at your house?" I nodded. "I need to establish an irrevocable trust. The house needs protection." She understood immediately. Years of working together, of sharing the same parents, the same history. "Stuart?" Another nod. Mildred prepared the documents within the hour. Professional efficiency inherited from our father. The house transferred into trust, with me as trustee for life. After my death, proceeds would go to charity. No family member could claim it. Stuart and Edith couldn't touch it legally, ever. I signed, Mildred notarized, done. "Be careful, Sylvester," she said as I gathered the papers. "I am." Careful had become my specialty. That night, my phone rang. Gordon's voice came through clearly. "Formal charges filed tomorrow. Money laundering, 7 counts. Wire fraud, 12 counts. Tax evasion, 4 counts. He's looking at 20 years federal time." I absorbed this information, processed it. "And Edith?" Silence stretched across the line. Then, "She's named on incorporation documents for 3 LLCs. She signed bank authorizations. We may need to charge her as accomplice." My stomach tightened despite my preparation. "May?" Gordon sighed. "If she cooperates, testifies against Stuart, we might offer a deal. Probation instead of prison." I considered the implications. "What do you need from me?" Gordon's answer reshaped everything. "Chief Judge asked if you'd consider presiding. Judge Morrison's out on medical leave. They need someone with your experience and your unique perspective on the case." I sat back in my chair. The leather creaked. "They want me to preside over Stuart's trial?" "Preliminary hearing first, then trial if it goes that far." "Can you be impartial?" I thought about the documents, the evidence, the months of manipulation. "I can be more than impartial. I can be just. Defense will try to get you removed. Let them try." After hanging up, I sat in darkness. The only light came from street lamps outside my window. Stuart and Edith were upstairs, their voices carrying through old floors. Arguing about something? About me, probably. I organized the trust documents in my safe, added them to the growing file of evidence, recordings, photographs. Everything documented, everything protected. They thought I was defeated. A lonely old man to manipulate and discard. They'd learn differently soon enough. The next 5 days felt like 5 weeks. Stuart received formal charges on Friday. 23 counts, potential 20 years federal prison. His lawyer Webb stopped sounding quite so confident. The house became a pressure cooker. I moved through it like a ghost, watching everything, saying little. Friday morning, Webb called. I heard Stuart's voice rise from the living room, where he'd relocated his temporary office. 23 counts, 20 years. A long pause. "What do you mean, the evidence is strong?" Stuart found me in my study an hour later. "They're charging me with laundering $3.2 million. That's insane." I looked up from my book. "Is it insane, or is it accurate?" His face darkened. "You know something? You must. How else would they know exactly where to look?" I returned to my reading. "Perhaps you weren't as careful as you thought." Tuesday afternoon brought the federal marshal. Professional woman, maybe 40, carrying an official envelope. "Sylvester Robertson?" "Yes." "Subpoena to testify, United States versus Stuart Holmes." She handed it over, watched me sign her receipt. Stuart stood in the hallway. After the marshal left, he approached slowly. "You're actually going to do it? Testify against me? I held the subpoena. I'm legally required. Edith appeared from the kitchen. Father, please, think about what this will do to us, to me. I looked at my daughter. Her eyes were red from crying. I am thinking about you. Justice protects everyone, even when it's uncomfortable. She wiped tears with the back of her hand. Justice, you're enjoying this. I met her eyes steadily. No, but I won't avoid my duty. Saturday evening, the Hendersons hosted their monthly neighborhood gathering. I arrived at 7, bringing wine I'd never drink. Stuart and Edith were already there. Stuart on his third glass, face flushed. He saw me enter. His voice carried across the patio, deliberately loud. Look who's here, the great judge. Retired, of course, because even courts didn't want him anymore. Forced laughter rippled through a few guests. Mrs. Henderson looked mortified. Stuart continued, emboldened by alcohol and audience. You know what his problem is? He's old and alone and can't stand watching young people succeed, so he tears them down. I poured water from the bar. Didn't look at him. He's a bitter, lonely failure who's taking revenge on his own family for his meaningless life. I set down my glass, walked toward the exit with measured steps. Mr. Henderson caught my arm. Sylvester, I'm so sorry. I nodded. Not your fault, but everyone had heard. The humiliation was public, witnessed. That's what Stuart wanted. Monday morning, I met Gordon at the courthouse cafe. He slid a document across the table between our coffee cups. Chief Judge Morrison's medical leave extended indefinitely. They need someone to handle your son-in-law's case. You're being formally considered. I studied the document. Official letterhead. What's the timeline? Gordon checked his notes. Decision by week's end, arraignment in 2 weeks. If you're appointed, you'd preside. Defense will object. Gordon smiled slightly. They will, and they'll lose. You were already disclosed as a witness. Judge appointment supersedes that. Plus, you're uniquely qualified. Financial crimes expert, appellate experience, unimpeachable record. I looked at him across the table. If I do this, it's by the book. No favors either direction. I wouldn't expect otherwise. We discussed logistics, procedures, the careful dance of legal propriety. Gordon left first. I finished my coffee alone, watching lawyers and defendants flow through courthouse doors. That evening, Stuart cornered me after dinner. Edith stood behind him, arms crossed defensively. I want you to withdraw as a witness, refuse the subpoena. I remained seated. That's not how subpoenas work. Stuart leaned on the table, knuckles white. Then we'll sue. Elder abuse, coercion, creating a hostile living environment. I folded my napkin with precise creases. You're welcome to try, though you should probably move out first. Stuart straightened. Move out? This is our home. We're not going anywhere. I stood slowly, met his eyes directly. The house is in an irrevocable trust, as of 2 weeks ago. You have no legal claim to it. None. Ever. Stuart's face went white. When did you? Edith gasped. Father, how could you? I walked toward my study. How could I protect my own property? Quite easily. Stuart's shout followed me down the hallway. You planned this. All of it. I closed the study door, locked it. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home felt like punctuation. Behind me, through the wood, I heard Edith crying, Stuart's voice trying to comfort her, their world collapsing around them while mine stayed perfectly intact. I opened my safe, added today's mental notes to the growing file, everything documented, everything protected, everything proceeding exactly according to plan. They'd underestimated me completely. Thought retirement meant irrelevance. Thought age meant weakness. They were learning the difference between being out of practice and being finished. I was far from finished. 3 weeks passed. Stuart's lawyer filed motions. The prosecution responded. Discovery proceeded. Throughout it all, I received one more piece of news. Chief Judge had officially appointed me to preside over United States versus Stuart Holmes. The preliminary hearing was set for mid-April. I prepared as I always had, methodically, thoroughly, and with absolute focus on the law. I woke before dawn on hearing day. The house was silent, Stuart and Edith still sleeping upstairs. I dressed carefully, charcoal suit, white shirt, navy tie. Professional but not ostentatious. My reflection showed a man of 64 who'd spent 30 years in courtrooms. Today would be no different, except it would be completely different. I gathered my briefcase, case file, notes, the judge appointment letter I'd received last week. The letter made it official. Honorable Sylvester Robertson, presiding judge. I'd told no one, not Stewart, not Edith, certainly not Webb. Let them discover it the right way. The Delaware Superior Court building rose before me, limestone and glass, justice carved above the entrance. I arrived 45 minutes early. Security guards recognized me, waved me through without scanning. "Good morning, Judge Robertson." I nodded. Word had spread among court staff, but not beyond. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor. The corridor stretched empty except for a few attorneys preparing. I walked slowly, mentally reviewing the case. 23 charges, strong evidence, competent prosecution, aggressive but outmatched defense. I was passing the courtroom entrance, briefcase in my left hand, when I heard voices. I glanced up. Stewart, Edith, Webb, coming from the opposite direction. Stewart saw me first, his face lit with vicious pleasure. Well, well, the witness arrives early. Webb looked uncomfortable. Edith stared at her shoes. I kept walking, intending to pass them without engagement. Then Stewart moved. I saw his foot extend, childish, obvious, deliberate. My shin hit his ankle. Physics took over. I stumbled, dropped to my right knee. My briefcase hit the marble floor, clasp springing open. Papers exploded across the corridor. Stewart's laughter echoed off the walls. "Old failure! You're a family disgrace!" People stopped. Conversations died. Every eye turned to us. 2 lawyers I recognized from other cases stared. A court clerk gasped. 3 security guards at the far end started moving our direction. I knelt on cold marble, surrounded by scattered documents. Stewart stood over me, chest puffed. "Look at him, can't even walk straight. This is who thinks he can judge me?" Webb tugged Stewart's sleeve. "Stewart, enough. We need to—" Stewart shook him off. "No, people need to see. This vindictive old man, flat on the floor where he belongs." I looked up at Edith. My daughter's face burned red, but she said nothing. Didn't move, just stood there, anchored to Stewart's side. A young clerk reached me first. "Judge Robertson, let me help." I raised one hand. "Thank you, I'm fine." I began gathering papers, motion briefs, evidence lists, and there, face up on the marble, my judge appointment letter. I picked it up carefully, returned it to the briefcase. Stewart didn't notice, too busy enjoying his moment. "See this?" Stewart called to the growing crowd. "The great judge, crawling on the floor." I collected each document methodically, stood slowly. The security guards were 10 feet away now. I closed my briefcase, looked at Stewart, held his gaze for 3 long seconds, said nothing. Sometimes silence carries more weight than words. I turned toward the side entrance, the one leading to judges' chambers. Stewart's voice followed me down the corridor. "That's right. Crawl away, old man." I gathered the last paper, a witness list, slipped it into my briefcase, snapped the clasp shut. The young clerk still stood beside me, hands extended to help. "Thank you," I said. "I'm fine." She stepped back reluctantly. I placed one hand on my knee, the one that hit marble, and stood, slowly. No hurry. Stewart watched, smirk still plastered across his face. I dusted my knee, straightened my tie, adjusted my jacket. Everything in its place. The security guards had formed a loose semicircle around us. One guard, older with gray temples, caught my eye. He knew, I could see recognition there. He'd worked this courthouse for years. He reached for his radio. I turned to Stewart, met his eyes directly. When I spoke, my voice was quiet, but carried through the suddenly silent corridor. "Stewart, you just assaulted a judge before his courtroom." He blinked, then laughed. "What judge? You're retired, old man." I continued as if he hadn't spoken. "That's a separate crime, contempt of court." His laughter grew louder, more theatrical. "You don't have any authority here. This is just you, pathetic and powerless." Edith's hand found his sleeve. "Stewart, enough, please." He shook her off. Webb had gone pale. "Stewart, we really need to—" Stewart cut him off. "After today's hearing, we're suing you. Defamation. You destroyed my reputation with your lies." I didn't answer Stewart. Instead, I looked at Edith. My daughter stood there, hand still extended toward her husband's arm, but body angled toward him, away from me. I held her gaze, wanted to see if there was anything left, any recognition of what she'd become. Her face flushed deeper red. Shame lived there, fear too, but not regret, not remorse. She'd made her choice weeks ago. This was just confirmation. "Father," she started, voice barely audible. I waited. She said nothing else, just looked away. That was answer enough. I'd raised her to value integrity, justice, truth. Stuart had taught her different lessons. She'd chosen his curriculum. I turned my back on both of them, not dramatically, just practically. I had somewhere to be. I walked toward the side entrance, the one marked judges and court personnel only. My steps echoed on marble. Behind me, Stuart's voice. "That's right, run away, hide in whatever corner they'll let you." I didn't respond, didn't turn. The security guards parted. The older one nodded to me. "Your Honor," he said quietly. I nodded back, reached the side door, pushed it open. Behind me, I heard Webb. "Stuart, we need to be seated now. The hearing starts in 2 minutes." Stuart's laugh. "Relax, Webb. After that display, this'll be easy." The judicial corridor was quiet. Thick carpet muffled sound. I walked past chambers belonging to other judges. Found the one assigned to me for this case. Inside, my judicial robe hung ready. I'd brought it from home, hung it here an hour ago when I arrived. I removed my jacket, slipped on the black robe, zipped it, adjusted the collar, looked in the small mirror on the wall. The face looking back was the same one that had presided over hundreds of cases. Today would be no different, except it would be completely different. I picked up the case file, opened the door leading directly into the courtroom, the judge's entrance behind the bench. Through the door, I could hear shuffling, whispered conversations. Stuart's voice among them, still confident, still believing he'd won something out there in the corridor. I stood at the threshold, took one breath, then another. My hand found the door handle. The bailiff's voice carried through the wood. "All rise, the Honorable Sylvester Robertson presiding." I pushed the door open, stepped into the courtroom. Stuart's face turned toward the bench. His smile froze, then shattered. The look in his eyes, shock transforming to horror, transforming to understanding, made every humiliation, every insult, every manipulation worth it. I took my seat behind the bench. The gavel rested before me, solid and final. "Please be seated," I said. The courtroom settled. Stuart remained standing, mouth open, staring. "Mr. Holmes," I said calmly, "you may sit down." He collapsed into his chair like his strings had been cut. Webb's face had gone from pale to gray. Edith, in the first row behind the defense table, gripped the bench in front of her, knuckles white. I opened the case file. Let the silence stretch. Let them absorb what had just happened. Let Stuart understand, finally, that he'd never been playing against a retired judge. He'd been playing against the court itself, and the court always wins. The courtroom buzzed with low conversation. Gordon Rice sat at the prosecution table, 3 thick folders before him. He looked calm, prepared. Stuart sat at defense table, leaning back in his chair, too casual for a man facing 20 years. Webb hunched beside him, reviewing notes, occasionally whispering. Stuart waved him off. "Relax," I heard him say. "After what happened in the corridor, we own this hearing." Edith sat directly behind the defense table, first row. She clutched her purse like a lifeline. Her eyes darted around the courtroom, avoiding everyone's gaze. The bailiff stood by the side door. The court reporter flexed her fingers over the stenograph. Everyone waited. The bailiff straightened. "All rise." Chairs scraped. Everyone stood. The court clerk's voice carried through the room. "The Honorable Judge Sylvester Robertson presiding." The side door opened. I stepped through in full judicial robes, black fabric, proper length, dignified. I walked to the bench, didn't rush, didn't hesitate, just walked the path I'd walked hundreds of times before. Climbed the 3 steps to the high bench, stood before the chair, looked out at the courtroom, every eye on me. Then I sat. "Be seated," the bailiff said. The rustling of people sitting sounded like wind through leaves, but I watched Stuart. Only Stuart. Stuart's face went from confident tan to pale gray in 3 seconds. His mouth fell open, No sound emerged. His hands, resting casually on the table, suddenly gripped the edge, knuckles white. Beside him, Webb had frozen mid-motion, pen hovering over legal pad. The pen fell, clattered on wood. Behind them, Edith gasped, audible even in the large room. Her hand shot out, grabbed the bench in front of her. At the prosecution table, Gordon's mouth twitched. He caught my eye for half a second, the slightest nod. At other tables, attorneys who'd come to watch a high-profile case leaned forward, sensing drama. They didn't know what, but they knew something had happened. I adjusted my reading glasses, opened the case file before me, arranged papers with deliberate care, let the silence build. Then I looked up, directly at Stewart. "Mr. Holmes," my voice carried easily. Courtroom acoustics, designed for this. "I trust you're comfortable. Perhaps I should call a doctor after your active morning?" The murmur started immediately. Heads turned toward each other, whispered questions. What happened this morning? What did he mean? Stewart's mouth worked but produced nothing. Webb found his voice first, shot to his feet. "Your Honor, I move for your recusal. You're the defendant's father-in-law. This is—" I raised one hand. "Objection noted and denied." Webb sputtered. "You can't—" "I can and have. I was officially appointed presiding judge for this case 7 days ago. Notice was provided to all parties, including your office, Mr. Webb." Gordon stood smoothly. "Your Honor, if I may assist? Certified mail receipt shows delivery to defense counsel's office last Monday, 9:47 a.m. Signed for by office paralegal." Webb dove into his briefcase. Papers flew. He found an envelope, stared at it. His face said everything. He'd seen it, dismissed it, or forgotten it. Stewart hissed something at him. Webb tried again. "This creates appearance of bias." I looked at him steadily. "Mr. Webb, I've presided over 643 cases in my career. My record for impartiality is public. Your client will receive fair trial by established procedure. If you wish to appeal after verdict based on my participation, that's your constitutional right. But I won't recuse." Stewart muttered, "This is rigged." I fixed him with a level stare. "Mr. Holmes, you'll speak only when recognized by this court. Understood?" He said nothing, just glared. "Before we proceed with the preliminary hearing," I continued, "there's a separate matter to address. Mr. Holmes physically assaulted me outside this courtroom approximately 30 minutes ago. Multiple witnesses, including court security." Webb jumped up. "Your Honor, that was before he knew—" "Irrelevant. Assaulting anyone on courthouse grounds is a crime. Assaulting a judge is contempt of court. I'm adding that charge to the indictment." Stewart exploded. "That's not fair. I didn't know." I struck the gavel once, hard. Ignorance of my position doesn't excuse the act. The assault occurred. Multiple witnesses observed it, including 3 court security officers who will testify if necessary. Webb's objection died on his lips. I opened the case file fully. "We'll now proceed with the preliminary hearing. Prosecution, present your case." Gordon stood. "Thank you, Your Honor. The United States calls its first witness." Stewart slumped in his chair. The confidence from the corridor had evaporated. He looked at Edith. She wouldn't meet his eyes. The trap had closed, and he finally understood who'd built it. The preliminary hearing lasted 4 hours. Evidence was strong enough for trial. Judge Morrison's medical leave continued indefinitely. I remained assigned to the case. Trial began 2 weeks later. It would last 3 weeks, long enough to dismantle Stewart Holmes completely. The trial began on a Monday. I entered the courtroom, as I had for the preliminary hearing, robed, prepared, impartial. Stewart sat at defense table, now pale and thin. 3 weeks in pretrial detention had changed him. The expensive suits were gone. Now he wore a simple white shirt and dark slacks provided by his lawyer. His hair had more gray. His face showed lines that hadn't been there before. Webb worked hard. I'll give him that. He challenged evidence, cross-examined witnesses aggressively, made every legal argument available. I ruled fairly on each motion. Some went his way when the law required it. Most didn't, because the evidence was overwhelmingly strong. Every ruling was documented, every objection considered properly. I gave Stewart the fairest trial possible, which made his defeat all the more complete. Gordon presented systematically. Bank records showing money flow through 7 LLCs. Transaction patterns consistent with classic money laundering: placement, layering, integration. The 3 stages were textbook clear. Email chains discussing clients and fees, always in suspicious quotes. 4 witnesses who'd paid Stewart to hide their money from legitimate authorities. Each one testified under immunity, describing exactly how Stewart had structured their illegal transactions. The evidence mounted day by day. Spreadsheets projected on screens, financial experts explaining the schemes, FBI agents describing their investigation. Each testimony, another nail in Stewart's coffin. By the end of the first week, the courtroom atmosphere had shifted. The spectators who'd come expecting drama got something more clinical: the methodical dismantling of a criminal enterprise through documentary evidence and expert testimony. Second week, Stewart took the stand. Against Webb's advice, I was certain. I saw the whispered argument before Stewart stood. Webb's face said he knew this was a mistake, but Stewart insisted. Still had that core of arrogance, that belief he could talk his way clear. He couldn't. Stewart presented himself as legitimate consultant. The LLCs were legal business structures. The money was clean. He'd made some paperwork errors, perhaps, but nothing criminal. His voice carried the same confident tone he'd used in my dining room months ago. Gordon's cross-examination was surgical precision. Mr. Holmes, why did Precision Capital Management receive $840,000 from a company you also control? Stewart fumbled. That was restructuring for tax efficiency. Tax efficiency? Or was it layering, the second stage of money laundering, moving money through multiple entities to obscure its origin? Objection. Webb stood. Argumentative. Sustained, I said. Rephrase, Mr. Rice. Gordon nodded. Mr. Holmes, can you explain the business purpose of transferring funds between 2 companies you wholly owned? Stewart couldn't. The more he talked, the worse it got. He contradicted earlier testimony. He fumbled dates. He claimed not to remember transactions he'd signed off on personally. I watched Stewart sweat under the courtroom lights, watched him realize too late that his confidence was groundless, watched Webb's face grow more desperate as his client self-destructed on the witness stand. The cross-examination lasted 6 hours over 2 days. By the end, Stewart's credibility was demolished. By Thursday of week 2, Stewart's defense had crumbled completely. Webb called character witnesses, but their testimony rang hollow against the documentary evidence. Stewart had no explanation for the money, no explanation for the shell companies, no explanation for the emails. Then Friday came. Gordon stood. The prosecution calls Edith Robertson Holmes to the stand. The courtroom went utterly silent. Stewart's head snapped up. I saw genuine shock in his face. He truly hadn't known this was coming. Edith stood from the gallery. She'd been attending every day, sitting in back now instead of front, alone, watching the evidence pile up against her husband. I'd seen her expression change over the 2 weeks, from defensive to uncertain to resigned. Now she walked to the witness stand with slow, deliberate steps. I swore her in, keeping my voice steady despite seeing my daughter take an oath in my courtroom. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" she whispered. "I do." Her eyes met mine for just a moment. I saw fear there, and something else. Acceptance. Stewart hissed at Webb. "Stop this. Object." Webb stood, knowing it was futile. "Your Honor, spousal privilege?" Gordon interrupted smoothly. Mrs. Holmes waived all marital privileges as part of her plea agreement with the United States Attorney's Office, executed last week. I looked at Stewart, watched understanding dawn on his face, watched the betrayal register. His wife had made a deal, saved herself, and he'd never known. "Objection overruled. The witness will testify." Stewart exploded from his chair. "Edith, what did you do? How could you—" I struck the gavel once, sharp and loud. "Mr. Holmes, you will remain silent or be removed from this courtroom. Mr. Webb, control your client." Webb grabbed Stewart's arm, pulled him back to his seat. Stewart's face had gone from pale to red. Rage and betrayal warring in his expression. Edith's voice shook as Gordon began. She looked at the wall behind me, not at me, not at Stewart. Just focused on that neutral space where she could speak without meeting anyone's eyes. "Mrs. Holmes, who created these 7 LLC companies?" "Stewart did, all of them. He registered them in Delaware, Nevada, and Wyoming. What was your role in these companies? He made me sign incorporation documents, made me director on paper for some of them, officer for others. Did you understand what you were signing? Stewart said it was for tax purposes, that having a family member as director made the business look more legitimate. I trusted him. I didn't ask questions. When did you realize the activity was illegal? Her voice broke. Gradually, over months. I saw bank statements with huge amounts moving through accounts. Stewart would be secretive about his work. When I asked questions, he'd get angry. Tell me it was none of my business. By the time I understood what was happening, I felt trapped. Why trapped? He said if I ever told anyone, I'd go to prison too, that my signature was on documents, that I was complicit. I was terrified of losing everything, of going to jail, of my father finding out. Stewart shouted, "Liar! You knew everything! You're saving yourself and throwing me away! Traitor!" I slammed the gavel hard enough that the sound echoed. "Mr. Holmes, one more outburst and I will hold you in contempt of court and have you removed. This is your final warning." His lawyer grabbed his arm with both hands now. Stewart subsided, but his face remained purple with rage. Gordon continued gently. Edith described every transaction she knew about, every lie Stewart told her, every manipulation. How Stewart threatened to divorce her and leave her with nothing if she refused to sign documents. How all the money went to his accounts, never hers. How he controlled everything, the finances, the business, her life. When Gordon finished, Webb approached for cross-examination. He tried to shake her testimony, tried to prove she'd known more than she claimed, but Edith held firm. She admitted her mistakes, admitted signing documents she shouldn't have, but maintained she'd been manipulated and frightened. After 30 minutes, Webb gave up. No further questions. Edith left the stand quickly, walked down the center aisle, didn't look at anyone, pushed through the courtroom doors and didn't return. I heard later she'd left the courthouse immediately, didn't stay for the rest of the trial. Stewart stared at the doors long after she'd gone. The fight had drained out of him. He looked smaller, beaten. Webb whispered something to him, but Stewart didn't respond. The trial continued another week. Closing arguments. Gordon's was devastating, methodically laying out the evidence, the testimony, the undeniable pattern of criminal behavior. Webb's was passionate but empty, grasping at reasonable doubt where none existed. My instructions to the jury were precise and balanced. I gave them the law clearly, explained the elements of each charge, told them to consider only the evidence presented. The jury deliberated 8 hours. That's actually quick for 23 counts. It meant they were certain. The verdict came back Thursday afternoon of week 3. The courtroom was packed. Everyone sensed this was the end. The jury foreman stood. Elderly man, retired accountant. He understood financial crimes. On count 1, money laundering in the first degree, how do you find the defendant? Guilty. Count 2, wire fraud. Guilty. Count after count, 23 times. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Plus guilty on the contempt charge for the corridor assault. Stewart sat motionless through it all. Didn't react, didn't protest. Just stared at the jury box as if trying to understand how this had happened. Webb slumped beside him, a man who'd fought hard and lost completely. I polled the jury individually as required. Each juror confirmed their verdict. 12 times, 12 affirmations. Mr. Holmes, you've been found guilty on all charges. Sentencing is set for May 15th at 10 a.m. Until that time, you're remanded to federal custody pending sentencing. The marshals approached with handcuffs. Stewart stood without resistance. Let them secure his wrists. As they led him toward the side door, he passed directly in front of the bench. He looked up at me. Our eyes met for 3 seconds. I saw it there. Final, complete understanding. He'd been outmaneuvered from the very beginning. Every move he'd made had been anticipated. Every trap had been set before he'd even seen it. The evidence I'd gathered in secret, the federal investigation I'd triggered, the judge appointment I'd accepted, even the assault in the corridor had become another charge against him. He nodded once. Not apology, not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. A chess player recognizing checkmate. I returned the nod. Equally brief, equally without emotion. Then they took him away. After the courtroom cleared, Gordon approached the bench. The gallery was empty now. just the two of us in the vast room. That was textbook, Sylvester, completely by the book. They'll use this case in law schools for years. I removed my reading glasses, rubbed the bridge of my nose. It was justice, Gordon, nothing more, nothing less. Your daughter's testimony? That couldn't have been easy to hear. She made her choices. These are the consequences. I didn't create them, I just made sure they arrived. Gordon gathered his files, 3 thick folders of evidence. Fair trial, no grounds for appeal. His lawyer did everything possible. That was the point, I said. He gets exactly what the law provides. Every protection, every right, every procedure, and still justice prevails. Gordon paused at the door. 13 years. He'll be an old man when he gets out. If he gets out, I said quietly. Gordon left. I sat alone at the bench, reviewing the verdict forms. 23 guilty verdicts signed by the foreman, 1 contempt conviction. The papers were crisp, official, final, justice served, professionally and completely. I stood, removed my robe for the last time in this case, folded it carefully over my arm, looked around the courtroom, the place where I'd spent so much of my career, the place where I'd delivered justice hundreds of times. This time was different. This time was personal. But the process had been identical. The standards the same, the fairness unwavering, not triumphant, just satisfied. The system worked. When used correctly, with patience and precision and unwavering adherence to the law, the system always worked. 2 weeks passed between verdict and sentencing. Stewart remained in federal custody at the Delaware Detention Center. Edith moved through those days like a shadow, attending required meetings with her probation officer, signing plea agreement papers, meeting with prosecutors to finalize her cooperation agreement. The sentencing hearing was set for mid-May. I prepared as always, thoroughly, dispassionately, with focus on appropriate punishment under federal sentencing guidelines. Those 2 weeks felt longer than the 3-week trial. The verdict was rendered, the guilt established. Now came the reckoning, translating that guilt into years, into concrete punishment, into the price Stewart would pay for every crime he'd committed. I spent hours reviewing the pre-sentencing report, a thick document prepared by probation services. It detailed Stewart's background, his financial crimes, the impact on victims, his lack of remorse during most of the trial. It calculated the guidelines, the mathematical formula that would suggest appropriate punishment. For money laundering at this scale, with multiple counts and aggravating factors, the range was wide. 8 years at the minimum, 20 at the maximum. I read victim impact statements. People Stewart had helped defraud, small business owners who'd lost money, investors who'd been deceived. Their words were raw and angry. They wanted justice. They wanted Stewart to pay. I would make sure he did. Mid-May arrived. I entered the courtroom for what I knew would be the final time in this case. The chamber was packed again. Sentencing hearings for high-profile cases always drew crowds. People wanted to see how the story ended. Stewart was brought in from custody, orange jumpsuit now instead of civilian clothes, hands cuffed in front of him, ankle chains shuffling as he walked. 2 weeks in detention had changed him further. He looked thinner, grayer, older. The expensive veneer had been stripped away completely. What remained was a middle-aged man facing the destruction of his life. He sat at the defense table, Webb beside him, looking tired and defeated. The lawyer had done his job, fought hard, lost cleanly. Now he would make one final argument for mercy. Gordon sat at the prosecution table with 2 assistant prosecutors. They'd carried folders of additional documentation, ready to argue for the maximum. The bailiff called us to order. Everyone stood as I entered and took the bench, then sat as I directed. I looked out at the courtroom, saw the same faces that had watched the trial, legal observers, law students, reporters with notepads. And in the back row, barely visible, I glimpsed Edith. She'd come after all, to watch her husband sentenced, to see the final chapter of the destruction she'd helped cause. "We're here for sentencing in United States versus Stewart Holmes," I began. "Mr. Webb, does the defense wish to present any matters before sentencing?" Webb stood, cleared his throat. "Your Honor, I'd like to present mitigating factors for the court's consideration." He spoke for 20 minutes, described Stewart as a first-time offender, a man who'd made terrible mistakes but had potential for rehabilitation. He emphasized Stewart's age, 58, and argued that a lengthy sentence would effectively be a life sentence. He called Stewart's elderly mother to the stand. She testified tearfully about her son, about the good man she believed him to be beneath the crimes. It was professionally done, but ultimately hollow. Stewart's crimes were too calculated, too extensive, too harmful. When Webb finished, I nodded. "Thank you, counsel. Mr. Rice, does the prosecution wish to present aggravating factors?" Gordon stood. His presentation was clinical and devastating. He detailed the sophistication of Stewart's schemes. The duration, 2 years of ongoing criminal activity. The amount, $3.2 million laundered. The abuse of trust, using his wife, using business relationships, using his position in my home. And finally, the assault on a judge in a courthouse, showing contempt not just for me, but for the entire legal system. Your Honor, Gordon concluded, the defendant showed no remorse until convicted. He maintained his innocence despite overwhelming evidence. He attempted to manipulate his wife and his father-in-law. He assaulted a sitting judge. The upper range of the guidelines, 20 years, would be appropriate. However, the government recommends 15 years as a balance between punishment and the defendant's age. I made notes throughout, calculating, weighing, finding the appropriate point on the scale of justice. Does the defendant wish to address the court before sentencing? Stewart stood slowly. Chains clinked. He'd prepared a statement, but he didn't read from paper. Just spoke. Your Honor, I accept responsibility for my actions. I made terrible choices. I hurt people I cared about. I hurt people I didn't know. I broke trust. I broke laws. I regret everything. He paused. His voice was steady but empty. The words were correct but felt rehearsed. I know I deserve punishment. I ask only that the court consider that I'm not a violent person, that I have family who need me, that I can still contribute something positive to society if given the chance. He sat. Webb patted his shoulder. Standard allocution, the same speech every white-collar criminal gave. Remorse without specificity. Regret without depth. I waited 10 seconds, let the courtroom settle into silence. Then I spoke. Before I announce sentence, I want to address the defendant directly. I looked at Stewart, made him meet my eyes. Mr. Holmes, you were convicted of 23 counts of financial crimes and 1 count of criminal contempt. The evidence against you was overwhelming. The jury's verdict was unanimous. You didn't make mistakes. You made choices. Calculated, deliberate choices to enrich yourself through illegal means. I paused. Let that sink in. You manipulated your wife. You lived in my home rent-free while plotting to steal it. You laundered millions of dollars for criminals. And when confronted with justice, you physically assaulted a judge in a courthouse. These weren't errors of judgment. They were acts of greed, arrogance, and contempt for the law. Stewart's face remained neutral, but I saw his jaw tighten. The sentencing guidelines suggest a range of 8 to 20 years for your crimes. I've considered the factors in mitigation. Your age, your lack of prior criminal record, your mother's testimony. I've also considered the aggravating factors, the sophistication of your crimes, the duration, the amount of money involved, the breach of trust, the assault on the court. I looked down at the sentencing worksheet I'd prepared. The calculations were complete. Stewart Holmes, you are hereby sentenced as follows. For counts 1 through 23, money laundering and wire fraud, I sentence you to 12 years in federal prison. For count 24, criminal contempt of court, I sentence you to 1 year in federal prison to run consecutive to the other sentence. Total incarceration, 13 years. I heard a gasp from somewhere in the gallery, probably Edith. Additionally, you are ordered to pay a fine of $500,000 to the United States. You are ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $3.2 million to be distributed among your victims according to their proportional losses. All assets derived from or used in the commission of your crimes are hereby forfeited to the United States government. Stewart sat motionless, staring ahead, the weight of 13 years pressing down on him. Do you understand the sentence as I've pronounced it? Yes, Your Honor. His voice was barely audible. Marshals, please remand the defendant to federal custody. They approached. Stewart stood without resistance. Let them take his arms. As they led him toward the side door, he passed the bench one final time. He looked up. Our eyes met. In that moment, I saw complete understanding pass between us. This wasn't just a sentence. This was the culmination of 7 months of planning. From the moment I'd found those documents in my printer to this moment right now. Every step had led here. Every choice I'd made had been building to this. Stuart nodded slightly, not asking for forgiveness, not apologizing, just acknowledging that he understood. He'd been beaten. Completely. Utterly. By an opponent he'd never taken seriously until it was far too late. I returned the nod. Brief. Professional. The acknowledgement of one player to another at the end of the game. Then they took him through the door. It closed behind him with a heavy thunk. Mrs. Holmes, please approach for your sentencing. Edith stood from the back gallery, walked down the center aisle. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. She wore a simple dress, no jewelry, hair pulled back, no makeup that I could see. She stood where Stuart had just stood, looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Edith Robertson Holmes, I said, using her full name, making it formal. Pursuant to your plea agreement with the United States Attorney's Office, having provided substantial cooperation in the prosecution of Stuart Holmes, you are hereby sentenced to 24 months supervised probation. You will perform 200 hours of community service. You are prohibited from serving as a director, officer, or fiduciary of any corporation, partnership, or business entity for a period of 10 years. You are ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $50,000 to the Federal Victims Compensation Fund, payable at a rate of $500 per month during your probation. She nodded, whispered, "Thank you, Your Honor." "You may step down." She turned, walked back up the aisle. Didn't look at me, didn't look at anyone, just walked out of the courtroom. That was the last time I saw my daughter in person. After the sentencing concluded, I returned to chambers, removed my robe, packed my briefcase with the case file, the sentencing documents, the final orders. I left through the judicial exit, walked through the courthouse corridors I'd walked for 30 years, but this time felt different, final. As I approached the main courthouse exit, I saw someone waiting in the corridor. Edith. She'd been crying. Mascara streaked her face. She held a tissue in trembling hands. "Father, please, can we talk? Just for a minute?" I stopped. Didn't approach, just stood 5 feet away. Maintained the distance. I never imagined it would end like this. Her voice broke. 13 years. I'm so sorry. For everything. For choosing him. For standing silent. For all of it. I looked at my daughter, saw the fear and shame and desperation in her face. Part of me, a small, distant part, felt something. Not quite sympathy, not quite pity. Just recognition that this was my child, broken by her own choices. But the larger part remained cold, unmoved. "You stood silent when he humiliated me at the neighborhood party," I said quietly. "You knew about his crimes and said nothing. You chose his side over integrity, over truth, over your own father. I was scared." She wiped her eyes. "I loved him. People make mistakes. You made choices, Edith." I cut her off. "Choices have consequences. What happened in that courtroom today? Those are your consequences, Stuart's consequences. They didn't just happen. They were earned." She took a shaky breath. "Can I at least stay at the house, just until I find something I can afford? The probation costs, the restitution payments. I can barely make rent as it is." I shook my head slowly. "The house is in an irrevocable trust, has been since March. You have no legal claim to it. You never did. You'll receive formal eviction notice through proper legal channels within the week." Her face crumpled, fresh tears. "You're throwing me out? Your own daughter?" "I'm enforcing my property rights. You and Stuart lived in my home rent-free for months while scheming to take it from me, while forging documents, while plotting. That's over now. The house is mine. You're not welcome there. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my concern. You're an adult. You'll figure it out. The same way you figured out how to forge my signature on loan documents." She gasped. "You know about that?" "I know about everything, Edith. The loan, the forged papers, the identity theft. That's why you'll also be receiving notice of civil lawsuits for fraud, for unpaid rent, for damages. You and Stuart are jointly liable. Those judgments will follow you for the rest of your life." She stared at me, processing, understanding finally dawning. You planned all of this. From the beginning. I protected myself. I pursued justice. I used the law the way it's meant to be used. Stewart broke it. You helped him. Now you both pay the price. I walked past her, heard her crying behind me. The sound followed me down the corridor, growing fainter as I moved toward the exit. I didn't look back. A week later, I sat in my study, the same study where this had all begun 7 months ago. I reviewed financial records and bank statements. Something had been nagging at me. A discrepancy I'd noticed but hadn't fully investigated during the trial preparation. I found it. A loan I'd never authorized, never signed for, never even knew existed. $95,000. Taken out against my house 8 months ago, right around the time Stewart and Edith had moved in. The application bore my signature, but it wasn't my signature, not quite. Close enough to fool a casual observer, perhaps. But I'd signed my name 10,000 times in my career. I knew every loop, every angle. This was forged. I pulled up the original loan documents online, saw both signatures, mine and Edith's, both co-borrowers. The money had gone into an account I'd never seen, closed now. But the loan remained, being paid from an escrow account against my house. Identity theft, fraud, elder financial abuse under Delaware law. I called my attorney, explained the situation. Within an hour, we'd filed a police report, initiated a civil lawsuit to void the fraudulent loan and recover all payments plus damages, named both Stewart and Edith as defendants. While reviewing the records, I calculated another figure, 18 months of rent. Stewart had lived in my home rent-free, using the guest room as his office. Fair market rent for that space, based on comparable commercial office rentals in Wilmington, was $10,000 per month. 18 months, $180,000. They'd never paid a cent, never offered, just taken. I filed a separate claim, unlawful occupancy, unpaid rent, unjust enrichment. Stewart was already in federal prison, beginning his 13-year sentence. These civil judgments would follow him for life, liens against any future assets, garnishment of any future income. Edith would share the liability. Her already garnished wages would be garnished further. Her debt would compound. She'd be paying for her choices for decades. I wasn't being vindictive. I was being thorough, documenting every theft, every fraud, every betrayal, creating a complete record, not for revenge, for justice, for the principle that actions have consequences, that crimes must be punished, that no one, not even family, gets away with stealing from me. I signed the legal documents, filed them electronically with the court, added them to my growing file labeled Holmes Civil Matters. Then I closed the file, returned it to the drawer, locked it. The criminal case was complete. The civil cases would proceed. Justice, methodical and inevitable, would continue its work, and I would continue mine. Summer passed. The legal machinery ground forward with its characteristic methodical pace. Stewart was transferred from the Delaware Detention Center to his permanent facility, FCI Schuylkill in Pennsylvania, a medium-security federal prison 2 hours north. Edith moved out of my house, taking only her personal belongings, and found a small apartment in a low-income neighborhood across town. The court judgments came through one by one. $180,000 for unlawful occupancy, $95,000 for the fraudulent loan, both amounts owed jointly and severally by Stewart Holmes and Edith Robertson Holmes. The chief judge sent a formal letter thanking me for my service to justice. August arrived, bringing with it the sense of completion. Everything resolved, everything restored. I sat in my study on a warm August evening, 3 months after sentencing. The windows were open, letting in the summer air. Outside, I could hear the neighborhood sounds, children playing in a nearby yard, a dog barking, the distant hum of traffic. Normal life, the life that had continued while my world had been consumed by pursuit of justice. I opened the thick file labeled United States v. Holmes Final Disposition. It contained everything: the arrest warrant, the indictment, trial transcripts, the verdict, the sentencing order, and now the final status reports. Stewart's current location: Federal Correctional Institution, Schuylkill, Pennsylvania. Inmate number 45782-066. Medium security facility. Sentenced to 13 years, eligible for release after 11 years with good behavior and completion of prison programs. Release date, assuming good behavior, March 2036. He would be 71 years old. The prison report indicated Stewart had been classified as a white-collar offender, assigned to work in the prison library, earning 12 cents per hour. 25% of those wages automatically garnished for victim restitution. At that rate, he'd pay perhaps $2,000 over his entire sentence, less than 1% of what he owed. Edith's status was more detailed. Current address, 412 Market Street, Apartment 2B, Wilmington. A building I knew, old construction, low rent, the kind of place where people landed when options ran out. Current employment, cashier at Superfresh grocery store on Concord Pike. Salary, $22 per hour, roughly $40,000 annually before taxes. Criminal record preventing professional employment. Her accounting degree, her years building a career, all worthless now. The probation report showed she was compliant, attending all meetings, completing community service hours at a homeless shelter, making her monthly payments, $500 for restitution, another $800 garnished for the civil judgments. Living expenses minimal, no luxuries, no extras. Survival mode. The court judgments were recorded liens now. Public record. $180,000 plus $95,000. Total, $275,000 owed to me personally. Plus Stewart's criminal fines, $500,000. Plus his restitution to other victims, $3.2 million. Plus Edith's $50,000 to the victims' fund. Total debt between them, nearly $4 million. They would never pay it, not in any meaningful way. Stewart would emerge from prison at 71 with nothing. Edith would pay her small monthly amounts for decades, barely making a dent. The judgments would follow them until death. But I didn't need the money. I needed the record, the permanent, indelible record that they had stolen, they had been caught, they had been punished, and they owed a debt that could never be fully repaid. That record now existed, forever. The next item in my file was more personal. A letter on heavy paper, Delaware Superior Court letterhead. Chief Judge Morrison's signature at the bottom. Dear Judge Robertson, it began, I write to formally express the court's gratitude for your exceptional service in United States v. Holmes. Your handling of this extraordinarily sensitive matter, presiding over the trial of your own son-in-law, exemplified the highest standards of judicial conduct. Your impartiality never wavered, despite profound personal circumstances. Your rulings were legally sound, procedurally correct, and beyond reproach. The defense found no grounds for appeal despite vigorous efforts. This case will undoubtedly be studied in law schools as an example of professional integrity under the most challenging personal pressure. The court is honored to have had you serve in this capacity. I set the letter aside carefully. It would be framed eventually. Hung in my study, not from vanity, but as a reminder. That justice could be personal and still be just. That fairness could be maintained even when dealing with family. 3 days after receiving that letter, my phone had rung. Dean Patricia Chen from Delaware Law School. Judge Robertson, we'd like to offer you a position as visiting professor, a course on judicial ethics and impartiality. The Holmes case would serve as the primary case study. I'd accepted immediately. When would the semester begin? January. That gives you time to prepare the curriculum. Purpose beyond retirement. Not just vengeance satisfied, but a future built. Teaching the next generation. Ensuring the lessons I'd learned through 3 decades on the bench and 7 months of personal battle would be passed forward. I returned to the financial documents spread across my desk. The civil judgments were comprehensive. Both decided in my favor. My attorney had handled it efficiently. I'd barely needed to appear. The house itself remained secure. The irrevocable trust I'd established in March stood unbreached and unbreachable. Valued now at $850,000. Protected absolutely. Upon my death, it would pass to the Delaware Community Foundation, funding scholarships for disadvantaged students pursuing legal education. My pension remained secure, my investments untouched. Everything Stewart and Edith had tried to take remained mine. Not revenge, restitution, justice. The evening mail had arrived while I was reviewing documents. One envelope had caught my attention, the handwriting unmistakably Edith's. I'd let it sit on the desk for an hour before opening it. 4 pages, handwritten. Her penmanship still neat despite the obvious emotion behind the words. Ink smudges where tears had fallen. "Father," it began, "I'm writing because I need you to know I understand. Not just what happened, but why it happened. The planning, the patience, the perfect execution of justice through the law. You taught me to value justice once when I was young. I forgot those lessons. I let love, or what I thought was love, blind me to right and wrong. I chose Stewart over you, over integrity, over truth. I stood silent when he humiliated you. I knew about the money laundering and convinced myself it wasn't my business. I signed documents I knew were questionable. What happened in that courtroom wasn't revenge. It was consequence, earned consequence. You didn't destroy my life. I destroyed it myself, one choice at a time. I don't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I understand now what you tried to teach me. Justice matters. Integrity matters. Principles matter more than comfort or convenience. You remain true to yourself, true to your oath, true to the law. I wish I had. Maybe someday, years from now, we can talk. But I understand if that day never comes. This letter isn't asking for reconciliation. It's acknowledging truth. You were right, I was wrong. Justice prevailed, as it should have. Your daughter, Edith." I read the letter twice, sat in silence afterward, holding the pages, felt something. Not forgiveness, that was too far, too soon, but something softer than the cold fury that had sustained me. Recognition, maybe. Acknowledgement that my daughter had finally understood. I considered responding, drafting a letter, opening a dialogue, decided against it. Not now. Perhaps never. The letter spoke of understanding. Let that be enough. I folded the pages carefully, placed them in the file, not discarding them, but not answering them either, just preserving them. Another document in the archive of this chapter. Then I closed the file completely, returned it to the drawer, locked the drawer, stood from my chair, this same chair where everything had begun, walked to the mantelpiece. A photograph rested there, me at 34, newly appointed to the appellate bench, wearing the black robe for the first time, right hand raised, taking the oath of office. I picked up the frame, looked at that younger version of myself. I do solemnly swear that I will administer justice without respect to persons, and do equal right to the poor and to the rich, and that I will faithfully and impartially discharge and perform all the duties incumbent upon me under the Constitution and laws of the United States. I'd kept that oath for 30 years, through 643 cases, through this case, the hardest, most personal case of all. I remain true, I said quietly to the photograph, to my younger self, to the oath we'd both taken. I remain true. I set the photograph back on the mantel, positioned it precisely where it had always been, walked to the terrace door, opened it, stepped outside into the August evening. The sun was setting over Wilmington. Amber light spread across the Delaware River in the distance. The city I'd served for 3 decades glowed in the fading daylight. Buildings lit from within, cars moving on streets, people living their lives. I stood at the terrace railing, breathed the warm air, felt the breeze on my face. I was alone in this house. No family remained under its roof. No wife, she'd passed 12 years ago. No daughter, no son-in-law, just me. But I wasn't lonely, wasn't diminished, wasn't defeated. I'd protected what was mine. The house stood secure in its trust. My reputation remained intact, my integrity uncompromised. I'd restored what was taken. The money would be repaid eventually. The record existed. The judgments were entered. I'd delivered justice through the proper channels. Not vigilante vengeance, not violence, but justice. Methodical, legal, inevitable justice. Using the system I'd served. Stewart would spend 11 to 13 years in federal prison. He'd emerge an old man, broken, with nothing. Edith would spend years rebuilding from nothing, paying debts, living with consequences, perhaps learning the lessons I'd tried to teach her. And I would move forward, teaching, writing, living in the house I'd protected, drawing satisfaction not from their suffering, but from the knowledge that justice had been served, completely, appropriately, with perfect adherence to law and principle. I wasn't a victim, had never been a victim. I was a judge, in the courtroom and in life, weighing evidence, calculating consequence, delivering verdict. The sunset deepened, orange became red, red faded to purple, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. I stood watching the transition, day to night. One chapter closing, another ready to begin. Justice had prevailed, as it always should, as it always must, as it always would when someone had the patience, the knowledge, and the unwavering commitment to see it through. The breeze shifted, cooler now. I turned back toward the house, my house, secure and protected. Stepped inside, closed the terrace door, locked it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the curriculum to prepare, students to teach, a future to build. But tonight, I would rest, satisfied, complete, at peace. The revenge was over. Justice had been delivered, and I had remained true. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.